Is there some sanity filtering back into the mad world of net zero and EV mandates? If this story in the New York Times is to be believed, then possibly, as rumours circulate that the Biden administration will relax the punishing schedule for its tighter emissions regulations, allowing more time for automakers to adapt. But as we shall see, there are still so many misconceptions and misunderstandings in the US, and pretty much everywhere else in fact, which are driving a misguided sense of urgency and panic which underpins the entire energy transition. It's all completely unnecessary, as we shall see. If we could remove this element of urgency, then there is a chance that this transition can be made to work, given sufficient time, with the market determining the future energy mix for private transportation, rather than governments backing the wrong horse by mandating EVs. Here's hoping. Welcome back to MGUY, British engineer and lawyer turned Sydney YouTuber. Please be sure to like, share and subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment down below and don't forget to follow me on Twitter X. Sometimes it seems that governments believe that each country lives in a little climate bubble, isolated from the rest of the world. But it doesn't work like that. Just because the US cuts emissions does not mean that climate change in the US will suddenly stop. It's a global system, and countries like China and India, which are literally powering ahead with their economies and burning fossil fuels like it's going out of fashion, are cancelling out virtually all other efforts to reduce emissions. Which is why the constant calls for urgency of action in the West are so nonsensical. Urgent action in the US or the UK or Australia will make zero difference to the climate, as long as other countries continue to offset those reductions with more emissions. And it drives policies which are economically catastrophic, forcing automakers and unions to push back hard against Biden's climate agenda. But perhaps the old guy with the bad memory, or more likely someone in his administration, is starting to take notice, as they fear votes disappearing in November. Biden administration is said to slow early stage of shift to electric cars. The change to planned rules was an election year concession to labour unions and auto executives, according to people familiar with the plan. In a concession to automakers and labour unions, the Biden administration intends to relax elements of one of its most ambitious strategies to combat climate change, limits on tailpipe emissions that are designed to get Americans to switch from gas-powered cars to electric vehicles, according to 3 people familiar with the plan. Instead of essentially requiring automakers to rapidly ramp up sales of electric vehicles over the next few years, the administration would give car manufacturers more time, with a sharp increase in sales not required until after 2030, these people said. They asked to remain anonymous because the regulation has not been finalised. The administration plans to publish the final rule by early spring. And a little bit later in the article, postponing the sharp increase in electric vehicle sales until after 2030 would still eliminate roughly the same amount of auto emissions as the original proposal by 2055, according to EPA models. But it would mean that the nation would continue to pump auto emissions into the atmosphere in the short run. Scientists say every year counts in the government's efforts to prevent the planet from tipping into more deadly and costly climate disasters. You'll have faster warming if US transportation emissions don't decline before 2030, said James Glynn, a senior research scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. Well, senior research scholar or not, this last statement is pure nonsense. Even if US private vehicle emissions were reduced to zero overnight, it would equate to about a reduction of 50% total transport emissions, which comprise just 29% of total US emissions, which comprise just 14% of global emissions, or in other words, about a 2% change in global CO2. The climate wouldn't even notice, which makes the urgency all the more ridiculous. But any move in the right direction has to be good news, since it at least opens the door to further deferrals in the future. If Trump wins in November, the whole crazy edifice will be dismantled, which is the best we can hope for, but whether that will happen is yet to be seen. If this transition is allowed to happen at a rational pace and not forced through in a mad panic, we may still be able to avoid the inevitable and significant damage to our economies and standards of living that would result from a rapid and reckless shift to unreliable renewables. Hopefully, for all our sakes, that realization will come sooner rather than later.